The morning sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold as Poppy Carter knelt beside a bed of roses in Willowbrook Park. Her hands, weathered and strong, worked the soil with practiced ease. She was 49 years old, with short brown hair streaked with gray and green eyes that held depth suggesting she had seen more of life than most people. "Morning, Poppy," called Mrs. Henderson, walking her small dog along the park path. The elderly woman was a regular fixture at the park, rain or shine, always cheerful despite her arthritis. "Good morning. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Poppy replied, sitting back to admire the roses. They were spectacular this year, their blooms full and fragrant in various shades of red, pink, and white. "Perfect for gardening, I'd say. The roses look wonderful this year." "Thank you. I'm quite proud of them," Poppy said warmly. She had spent months preparing these beds, testing soil pH levels, adjusting nutrient balances, and carefully selecting varieties that would bloom in succession throughout the season. This was her life now, 5 years after arriving in Willowbrook. The small town, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, had become her sanctuary. Everyone knew everyone here, and the biggest news was usually about whose garden won first prize at the county fair or which local business was having a sale. She had been the head gardener at Willowbrook Park for 4 years, and before that, she had worked at the local garden center for a year, learning the names of plants she had never paid attention to before, understanding the rhythms of growth and bloom, rain and sunshine. It was a far cry from her previous career, but that was exactly what she needed. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and surveyed the park. It was a modest space, about 5 acres of carefully maintained lawns, flower beds, walking paths, and a small pond with ducks. In the center stood an old bandstand, freshly painted white, where the town band played on summer evenings. Near the entrance, a row of benches sat under ancient oak trees, their branches providing shade for tired visitors. The park was Poppy's domain, and she took pride in every corner of it. She knew which plants needed more water, which ones preferred shade, and where the sunlight hit strongest at different times of day. She understood the soil's composition, the seasonal patterns, and the best times to prune or fertilize. This knowledge had become her comfort, replacing the other kind of knowledge she once possessed. Knowledge of explosive devices, detonation patterns, and the precise ways to disarm mechanisms designed to kill. Michael Torres, the town's recreation director and technically her boss, walked toward her with his characteristic energetic stride. He was in his mid-30s, always wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt with the town logo, his enthusiasm sometimes exhausting, but his kindness always genuine. "Poppy, there you are. The spring festival is only 2 weeks away. The mayor wants this year's festival to be the biggest yet. We're expecting over 3,000 people." Poppy felt a slight tightness in her chest, but pushed it away. Large crowds still made her uncomfortable, though she had gotten better at managing the anxiety. 3,000? That's quite a lot for Willowbrook. "I know. We're inviting vendors from neighboring towns. There'll be live music all day, games for kids, a craft fair, and of course, the food stalls. The park is going to be packed." Michael's eyes shone with excitement. And Mayor Patterson specifically mentioned how amazing the flowers look. He wants them at their absolute best for the festival. "They will be," Poppy assured him. "What do you need from me?" Michael pulled out his tablet and launched into a detailed explanation of where temporary structures would be placed, where electrical connections would be needed, and which areas would experience the most foot traffic. Poppy listened carefully, mentally cataloging which flower beds would need extra protection, where she might need to install temporary barriers, and how much extra watering would be required. "I'll need to reinforce the edges of the main lawn," she said when he finished. "And we should set up rope barriers around the rose garden. I don't want people trampling the beds." "Perfect. Can you work up a plan by Friday?" Consider it done. Michael thanked her and hurried off to his next task, leaving Poppy alone again in the early morning quiet. She looked around the park, trying to imagine it filled with thousands of people, the noise and chaos that would bring. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and she clenched them into fists. "It's just a festival," she whispered to herself. "Just a normal, happy festival. Nothing bad is going to happen." She had been telling herself similar things for 5 years now, and most days, she believed it. Later that afternoon, Poppy stopped at the Cozy Cup, Willowbrook's only coffee shop, for her usual mid-afternoon break. The shop was run by Tom Bailey, a former teacher who had retired early to pursue his passion for coffee and baking. The interior was exactly what its name suggested: cozy, with mismatched armchairs, bookshelves lining the walls, and the constant aroma of fresh coffee and pastries. "The usual, Poppy," Tom called from behind the counter as she walked in. He was a gentle man in his early 50s, with kind eyes and a warm smile that made everyone feel welcome. "Please. And maybe one of those blueberry muffins, if you have any left. Last one, and I was saving it for you." Tom winked as he prepared her black coffee and plated the muffin. His attention to regular customers' preferences was one of the reasons the Cozy Cup had become the town's gathering place. Poppy settled into her favorite chair by the window, where she could watch the street outside. Main Street was quiet this time of day, with just a few people going about their business. She recognized most of them: Mr. Patterson from the hardware store, young Emma from the library, and the Johnson twins who worked at their parents' bakery. Emma spotted Poppy through the window and waved, then came into the coffee shop. She was 26, with long dark hair usually tied back in a practical ponytail, wearing her typical combination of cardigan and comfortable jeans. Her infectious enthusiasm for books and life in general always brightened Poppy's day. "Poppy, mind if I join you?" "Please do." Emma got her coffee, a complicated drink with extra foam that Tom somehow always made perfectly, and sat down with a happy sigh. "I needed this break. We've been so busy at the library preparing for the festival. We're setting up a book stall, and I've been going through boxes of donations all week."
We're setting up a book stall, and I've been going through boxes of donations all week. That sounds like a lot of work. It is, but I love it. Every box is like a treasure hunt. Today I found a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. Can you imagine? Emma's eyes lit up as she talked about books, which she always did. The library was more than her job. It was her passion. What about you? The park must need tons of preparation for the festival. Tons, Poppy agreed with a slight smile. But it'll be worth it to see everything come together. Emma studied her for a moment with the perceptiveness that sometimes surprised Poppy. "You know, I've always admired how calm you are. No matter what's happening, you seem so centered and peaceful. I wish I could be more like that."
Poppy almost laughed at the irony. Calm? If only Emma knew about the nightmares that still woke her some nights, the sudden moments of panic when she heard unexpected loud noises, the way her hands sometimes shook when memories of Manchester surfaced, but she had learned to hide it well, to present a serene exterior even when her internal world felt chaotic. "Everyone has their struggles, Emma. I'm not as calm as you think." "Well, you hide it well then," Emma said cheerfully, taking a sip of her elaborate coffee. "Oh, I meant to tell you. I saw the most interesting book donation today. It was a memoir by a former bomb disposal expert. Can you imagine doing something that dangerous every single day?" Poppy felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral, years of training helping her maintain composure. "No, I can't imagine it." The author wrote about how every call could be their last, how they had to stay completely focused and calm even when dealing with devices that could kill them in an instant. It's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Emma shook her head in wonder. "I could never do something like that." The responsibility would crush me. Could you? I've never thought about it. Poppy lied smoothly, though the lie tasted bitter. It seems like a job for a very specific type of person. Someone brave, that's for sure. And probably a little bit crazy. Emma laughed, oblivious to how her words affected Poppy. I'm much better suited to my quiet library where the biggest danger is a paper cut or maybe a book falling off a high shelf. They continued chatting about lighter topics, the upcoming book club meeting, the new flavor of ice cream at the general store, Mrs. Henderson's perpetually misbehaving dog. But Poppy's mind kept drifting back to Emma's innocent comments about the bomb disposal memoir. That had been her life once. Every day, every call, knowing that one mistake could be fatal. She had been good at it too, one of the best in her unit. Until that last day in Manchester, when everything went wrong. After Emma left to return to the library, Poppy sat alone with her coffee, staring out the window, but not really seeing the street. Instead, she saw flashes of memory. The heavy bomb suit that weighed 40 kilograms. The weight of responsibility that felt even heavier. The faces of her teammates. The sound of sirens echoing off concrete walls. And then the explosion that had changed everything. Poppy? Are you okay? She blinked and found Tom standing beside her chair, concern evident on his face. She must have been lost in the memory longer than she realized. I'm fine. Just lost in thought. You looked a million miles away, and not in a good way. Tom's voice was gentle, not prying, but caring. Is everything all right? She managed a reassuring smile. Really, I'm okay. Just thinking about all the work ahead for the festival. Tom didn't look entirely convinced, but he respected her privacy enough not to push. Well, you know where to find me if you need to talk. Or if you just need more coffee and muffins. Thank you, Tom. That means a lot. After he returned to the counter, Poppy finished her coffee and muffin, then headed back to the park. She had work to do, and work was the best distraction she had found from the memories that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her. The next morning, Poppy drove her old pickup truck to the Willowbrook Garden Center on the edge of town. She needed to order extra mulch and some replacement plants for areas that would be disturbed during the festival setup. The garden center was owned by Robert and Sarah Chen, a couple in their 60s who had become like family to Poppy over the years. They had given her that first job when she arrived in town 5 years ago, desperate for work but having no experience with plants whatsoever. She remembered her interview vividly, sitting in their small office, surrounded by seed catalogs and gardening magazines, her military credentials useless in this new civilian world she was trying to navigate. I see you don't have any gardening experience, Sarah had said, reviewing Poppy's sparse resume with kind but discerning eyes. No, ma'am. But I'm a fast learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Poppy had kept her voice steady, trying not to show the desperation she felt. She needed this job, needed something to anchor her in this new life she was trying to build. Robert had studied her with perceptive eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. Where did you work before coming here? Poppy had been prepared for this question, had practiced her answer. Government work. I'd rather not go into details if that's okay. I'm looking for a fresh start. The Chens had exchanged a glance, one of those wordless conversations that long-married couples could have. Something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of someone carrying a burden. Then Sarah had smiled warmly and said, Everyone deserves a fresh start. When can you begin? Now, as Poppy walked into the garden center, Sarah greeted her with a warm hug. Poppy, we were just talking about you. Robert's in the greenhouse if you want to say hello. I will in a moment. I need to place an order for the festival preparations. They went over the list together, Sarah making notes on her tablet with the efficiency of someone who had run this business for decades. The garden center had modernized over the years, but it still maintained its cozy, welcoming atmosphere. The The smell of soil and growing things filled the air, a scent that Poppy found deeply comforting, grounding her in the present moment. "How are you feeling about the big festival?" Sarah asked casually, but Poppy caught the slight concern in her voice. Sarah was one of the few people in town who had guessed that Poppy was dealing with something from her past, though she had never pried for details. "I'm managing. It's a lot of people, but I'll be busy with preparations. That helps keep my mind focused."
That helps keep my mind focused. If you need anything, you know where to find us. And I mean anything, Poppy, not just gardening supplies. I do. Thank you, Sarah. Your support has meant more than you know. After finishing her order, Poppy found Robert in the greenhouse, tending to a collection of rare orchids he was cultivating. Robert was a quiet man, content to spend hours among his plants, speaking to them in soft tones as if they were old friends. But he had taught Poppy more about gardening than any book could have. Not just the technical knowledge, but the patience, the attention to detail, the respect for living things. "Ah, Poppy," he said without looking up from the delicate phalaenopsis he was examining. "Come see these. The blooms are just starting to open." Poppy joined him, admiring the delicate flowers with their intricate patterns and soft colors. "They're beautiful. You have such a gift with orchids."
Patience, mostly, and attention to detail. Each plant has its own needs, its own rhythm. He carefully adjusted the humidity gauge nearby with precise movements. "Speaking of which, how's your planning for the festival going? Sarah mentioned you seemed a bit anxious about it." Poppy smiled slightly. Of course they had discussed it. The Chens shared everything. "I'm fine, Robert. Really, it's just a lot of work and organization." He turned to look at her then, his expression gentle but serious. "You know, Poppy, in the 5 years I've known you, I've watched you transform this town's park into something remarkable. Your skill and dedication are evident in every flower bed, every path, every corner of that space. But I've also noticed that you carry something heavy with you, some burden from your past." Poppy tensed slightly, but Robert continued in his calm, measured way. "I don't need to know what it is. Your privacy is your own, and we respect that. But I want you to know that whatever you're running from or trying to forget, you don't have to face it alone. Sarah and I, and many others in this town, we see you. Not just the gardener you've become, but the capable, skilled, remarkable person you clearly are." Poppy felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I appreciate that more than you know, Robert. Whatever happened before you came here, it made you who you are. And who you are is someone this town is lucky to have. Remember that when the festival crowds make you uncomfortable, when the noise and chaos feel overwhelming, you have friends here who support you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Robert seemed to understand and returned his attention to the orchids, allowing the moment to pass naturally. They stood together in the warm greenhouse, surrounded by living things growing under Robert's patient care, and Poppy felt some of her anxiety ease. That evening, as Poppy worked late in the empty park, the memories came flooding back with a vividness that sometimes still took her breath away. They often did when she was doing repetitive tasks, when her hands were busy but her mind was free to wander through corridors of the past she usually kept locked. Her name hadn't always been Poppy Carter. Well, Carter had always been her surname, but she had gone by Catherine most of her life. Catherine Carter, bomb disposal specialist, Royal Navy. 18 years of service, countless successful operations, numerous commendations, and medals that now sat in a box in her cottage, rarely looked at, but never quite forgotten. She had joined the military at 21, drawn to the challenge and the sense of purpose it provided. Her father had been in the Navy, and though he had died when she was 16, his influence had shaped her path. She wanted to serve, to make a difference, to do something that mattered. The training had been grueling, physically demanding in ways that pushed her body to its limits, mentally challenging in ways that required absolute focus and precision, and emotionally taxing in ways she hadn't anticipated. They learned not just to disarm devices, but to think like those who built them, to understand the psychology of destruction in order to prevent it. But she had excelled. She had a natural ability to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly when others panicked, and to see patterns and solutions that weren't obvious to everyone. Her instructors had noted her exceptional spatial reasoning, her steady hands, her ability to focus absolutely on the task at hand while maintaining awareness of her surroundings. Her first call-out as a fully qualified technician had been to a suspicious package at a train station. She remembered the weight of the bomb suit, 40 kilograms of Kevlar and protective material, how it limited her movement but provided essential protection. She remembered the absolute silence as she approached the package, her team watching from a safe distance behind protective barriers. She remembered her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. And she remembered the surge of relief when she determined it was a false alarm, just someone's forgotten luggage containing clothes and souvenirs. Over the years, she had dealt with hundreds of devices. Some were real, some were hoaxes. Some were sophisticated military-grade explosives, others crude but effective improvised devices. Each one required the same careful approach, the same methodical thinking, the same respect for the destructive power contained in circuits and chemicals, and the human capacity for violence. She had saved countless lives, though the people she saved rarely knew who she was. That was the nature of the job. Anonymous heroism. You didn't disarm bombs for recognition. You did it because it needed to be done, because you had the training and the skill, because someone had to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them. She had loved her work. The sense of purpose, the camaraderie with her team, the knowledge that she was making a real difference. Her team had been like family, closer than family in many ways, bonded by shared danger and absolute trust. There was James, her partner for 10 years, whose steady presence and dark humor had gotten her through many difficult calls. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding, able to communicate with glances and subtle gestures when words weren't safe to use.
There was young Marcus, new to the unit, but eager to learn, with a brilliant technical mind and the kind of fearless optimism that only comes before you've seen things go truly wrong. There was Sergeant Williams, their commanding officer, who treated them with respect and genuine care, who fought for better equipment and training, who never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And then there was the incident in Manchester, 5 years ago, but it felt like yesterday when the memories surfaced. A shopping center, a credible threat based on intelligence that proved horrifyingly accurate. Thousands of people evacuated in organized chaos. 3 suspicious packages found in different locations, each potentially deadly. The pressure was immense, but they had trained for situations like this. They had protocols, procedures, experience. They had split up to assess each device simultaneously, trying to determine which were real threats and which might be decoys. Time was critical. The longer the evacuation lasted, the more panic could spread, the more vulnerable people became in the crowded streets outside. She had taken the 3rd location, in the parking garage beneath the shopping center. The package was hidden behind a concrete pillar, carefully placed to maximize structural damage if it detonated. As she approached in her bomb suit, her equipment detecting high levels of electrical activity, she knew this was the real threat. This was the one meant to cause casualties, to bring down the structure, to kill and maim and terrorize. The device was sophisticated, more advanced than most they encountered. It had multiple triggers, anti-handling measures designed to punish any attempt at disarmament, and a timer counting down with digital precision. She had worked carefully, methodically, talking James through each step via radio. He and Marcus were dealing with the other packages, which turned out to be decoys. But they listened as she worked, ready to provide guidance if needed. She had been almost done. Just one more wire to cut, one more circuit to interrupt, when something went wrong. To this day, she didn't know exactly what. Maybe she had missed a trigger. Maybe the device had a failsafe she hadn't detected. Maybe it was just the random cruelty of fate. But the device detonated. The bomb suit saved her life. Designed to protect against the blast, it had done its job, containing most of the explosion's force. But the shockwave had thrown her against the concrete wall like a rag doll. She remembered the sound, impossibly loud, a physical force that seemed to tear through reality itself, then a high-pitched ringing that blocked out everything else. She remembered lying on the ground, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching fire and smoke swirl around her in abstract patterns. She remembered James's voice on the radio, panicked and desperate, calling her name again and again. The physical injuries had been significant but manageable. Broken ribs, a fractured arm, severe bruising that turned her entire left side purple and black, and temporary hearing loss in one ear that took months to fully recover. The psychological injuries had been far worse and far less visible. The nightmares started in the hospital and never really stopped. She would wake in the dark, gasping for air, feeling the weight of the bomb suit crushing her chest, hearing the countdown that ended in fire. The panic attacks came without warning, triggered by unexpected sounds, by confined spaces, by the smell of certain chemicals or burning materials. The constant state of hypervigilance exhausted her, her body refusing to accept that she was safe, that the danger had passed. She had tried to return to duty after 6 months of recovery and therapy. She had completed all the medical clearances, passed all the psychological evaluations with a combination of genuine progress and careful performance. She had convinced everyone, including herself, that she was ready. But the first time she suited up for a call-out, reality crashed through her carefully constructed facade. Standing in front of the bomb suit, she couldn't make herself put it on. Her hands shook so violently she couldn't grip the fasteners. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, hyperventilation making her dizzy. The world seemed to tilt around her, and she found herself on the floor, back against the wall, unable to speak or move or function. James had found her there, sitting in her combat fatigues, tears streaming down her face, looking at the bomb suit like it was a monster. He had sat with her on that cold floor, not saying anything at first, just being present. His presence had always been her anchor, and even in her breakdown, it helped.
When she finally found her voice, she had told him the truth. She couldn't do it anymore. The fear was too strong, the trauma too deep. The thought of approaching another device made her want to vomit. The career she had built, the identity she had forged, the person she had been for 18 years, it all felt impossible now. The military had been understanding. Her years of service and exemplary record meant she could leave with honor and a full pension. But understanding didn't make it easier. She felt like she had failed, like she had let down her team, her service, and herself. She felt broken, useless, defeated by her own mind. She had left everything behind: the career, the identity, the colleagues who had become family. She had looked at a map of quiet places far from military bases and picked Willowbrook almost at random. She had started using her middle name, Poppy, wanting to create some distance from Catherine Carter, the bomb disposal expert, wanting to become someone new. The first year had been the hardest, learning a new profession from scratch, adapting to civilian life where people complained about trivial things, dealing with the trauma without the structure and purpose her military career had provided. But slowly, painfully, she had healed. The nightmares became less frequent. The panic attacks became manageable with therapy and medication. The quiet life of a gardener in a small town had given her what she needed: peace, purpose, and a chance to rediscover who she was beyond her career. Until now. Until the festival preparations were stirring up old anxieties, old fears, old memories of crowds and danger, and the constant awareness that threat could be anywhere. But nothing bad is going to happen, Poppy whispered to herself, standing among the roses in the darkening park.
This is just a normal festival. This is my life now. I'm safe here. She gathered her tools and headed for her truck, leaving the park in the twilight. As she drove home to her small cottage on the edge of town, she made a conscious decision. The festival would be fine. She would do her job, maintain the park, and everything would be normal and safe and peaceful. Nothing bad was going to happen. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity that kept Poppy too busy to dwell on her anxieties. The entire town seemed to be preparing for the spring festival, and Poppy was at the center of it all, at least as far as the park was concerned.
She reinforced the edges of the main lawn with temporary fencing, creating boundaries that would protect the grass from excessive wear, while still allowing free movement. She installed decorative barriers around the more delicate flower beds, ensuring that the crowds wouldn't accidentally damage months of careful cultivation. She arranged for extra watering systems, knowing that all the foot traffic and festival equipment would stress the plants. Michael was in constant motion, coordinating with vendors, arranging permits, checking electrical hookups, and generally trying to manage what felt like 1,000 details simultaneously. He stopped by the park multiple times a day to check on progress, his tablet clutched like a lifeline, often looking slightly frantic but always maintaining his characteristic optimism. "The mayor wants the bandstand decorated with flowers," he announced one morning, his voice slightly breathless from rushing over. "Can you do something with climbing roses or maybe some hanging baskets?" "I can arrange hanging baskets. The climbing roses would take months to establish properly." "Right, of course. Hanging baskets are perfect. How many do you think we need?" They walked around the bandstand together, counting positions, discussing colors and types of flowers that would look best against the white painted wood. Poppy took notes, mentally calculating how much soil, how many plants, and how much time she would need. "The festival is a week away," she said, running through her schedule. "I'll need to start on these baskets immediately. Whatever you need, just let me know. Budget isn't a concern. The mayor is really counting on the park looking spectacular. He keeps saying this festival will put Willowbrook on the map." After Michael hurried off to his next crisis, Poppy stood looking at the bandstand, envisioning how it would look decorated with cascading flowers. Despite her anxiety about the crowds, she felt a surge of creative excitement. This was the part of her job she loved, transforming a space, creating beauty, making people smile when they saw something lovely. She drove to the Chen's Garden Center and spent 2 hours selecting plants for the baskets: petunias in deep purple and pristine white, trailing lobelia in rich blue, and silvery decandra for contrast and texture. Sarah helped her load everything into her truck, along with the special soil mix and hanging baskets she would need. "These are going to be beautiful," Sarah said, admiring the plants with the eye of someone who had spent decades in the business. "The bandstand will be the centerpiece of the festival." "That's the plan. Though I'm more worried about the crowds trampling everything else." "The park can handle it. You've prepared well." Sarah paused, then added gently, "And you can handle it too, Poppy. I know large crowds make you uncomfortable, but you'll have plenty to keep you busy. Just focus on your work, like you always do." That's what I keep telling myself. Back at the park, Poppy spent the rest of the day planting the hanging baskets. It was meticulous work, requiring careful attention to detail. She arranged each plant for maximum visual impact, ensuring proper drainage so water wouldn't pool and damage roots, making sure the soil was packed correctly to provide support but not restrict growth. She worked steadily, losing herself in the task, finding the same sense of calm that gardening always gave her when she could focus completely on the work. Emma stopped by during her lunch break, bringing sandwiches from the deli and bottles of cold water. "I figured you'd be too busy to eat," she said, handing Poppy a wrapped sandwich. "You figured right. Thank you." They sat on one of the park benches, eating in comfortable companionship. Emma's presence was always calming, her cheerful chatter about library matters providing a pleasant distraction. "The library book stall is all set up in the community center," Emma reported between bites of her sandwich. "We've got hundreds of books, all sorted by genre and priced. It took forever, but we're ready. How are things going here?" "On schedule. The bandstand decorations are almost finished, and the rest of the park is as ready as it can be." "Are you nervous about the festival?" With all those people? Emma's question was gentle, without judgment, and Poppy appreciated her friend's sensitivity. "A bit, I suppose. I'm more used to quiet days in the park."
Well, if it gets overwhelming, you can hide out at the library stall with me. We'll be selling books and judging people's reading choices together. Emma grinned mischievously. It'll be fun and definitely less chaotic than the main festival area. I might take you up on that offer. They finished their sandwiches, and Emma headed back to the library while Poppy returned to her baskets. By the end of the day, she had completed 15 of them, each one full of colorful blooms that would look stunning hanging around the bandstand. Her back ached from the work. Her hands were stained with soil, but she felt satisfied. The physical labor was good for her, keeping her mind occupied and her body tired enough to sleep. The final day before the festival dawned gray and rainy. Poppy woke to the sound of water drumming on her cottage roof and immediately worried about the park. All her plants, the new decorations, the festival setup, everything would be soaked.
She dressed quickly in waterproof gear and drove to the park through the downpour. Several other volunteers were already there, including Michael, who looked like he might burst into tears at any moment. "This is a disaster," he moaned, staring at the rain with despair. "The weather report says it'll rain all day. Everything is getting soaked." "The forecast for tomorrow is clear," Poppy reminded him calmly, her military training helping her maintain composure in the face of his panic. "We just need to protect what we can today, and then dry everything out tonight." She took charge, organizing a team to cover vulnerable equipment with tarps, move sensitive items into the community center, and create drainage channels to prevent flooding in low-lying areas of the park. The work was wet and uncomfortable, but everyone pitched in with good humor, and Poppy's calm leadership kept spirits up. By afternoon, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. Poppy walked through the park, assessing the damage with a critical eye. Some flowers had taken a beating, their petals scattered by the heavy rain, but most had survived well. The hanging baskets around the bandstand looked a bit droopy, but would perk up once the sun came out. "You saved us," Michael said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee from the cozy cup. His relief was palpable. "If you hadn't organized that protection effort this morning, we'd have lost half our setup. It's what needed to be done." Poppy accepted the coffee gratefully, warming her cold hands on the cup. "You're so good at crisis management. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally? Like event management or emergency coordination?" She almost laughed at the irony. "I've done crisis management professionally. I'm quite happy being a gardener now." Michael looked curious, clearly wanting to ask more, but before he could, his phone rang with another festival-related crisis, and he hurried off to deal with it. That evening, after the rain had stopped completely, Poppy made one final walk through the park. The sun was setting, breaking through the clouds in dramatic shafts of golden light. Everything sparkled with raindrops, and a beautiful rainbow arched across the sky above the hills, painting the world in vibrant colors. Robert and Sarah Chen had stopped by to see how the preparations were going. They found Poppy near the bandstand, adjusting one of the hanging baskets and checking that the brackets were secure after the rain. "It looks wonderful," Sarah said warmly, admiring the work. "You've done an amazing job, Poppy." "Thank you. I just hope the weather behaves tomorrow." Robert was studying the festival setup with interest, his experienced eye taking in all the details. "This is quite an operation. You must have had experience organizing large events or managing complex projects." "In a previous life," Poppy said vaguely, keeping her tone light. "Well, you've clearly brought those skills to bear here. The park has never looked better, and the festival organization is impressive." He paused, then added gently, "You know, Poppy, Sarah and I have always respected your privacy. We know you're here for a fresh start, and we don't need to know the details of your past. But we want you to know that we see you, not just the gardener you've become, but the capable, skilled, remarkable person you clearly are." Poppy felt tears prick her eyes, moved by their kindness and acceptance. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever crowds or challenges arise, you have friends here who support you. You're not alone in this, Poppy." Sarah hugged her, and Robert patted her shoulder in his gentle way, and then they left her alone in the twilight park. Poppy stood among her flowers, watching the last light fade from the sky, feeling grateful for the kindness of these people who had welcomed a stranger into their community and given her a second chance at life. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but she was ready to face them. Chapter 7. Festival Morning. The morning of the spring festival was perfect. Clear blue sky stretched from horizon to horizon, gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and fresh grass, and the temperature was comfortable, warm but not hot. It was exactly what a festival organizer could hope for. Poppy arrived at the park at 6 in the morning to find it already bustling with activity. Vendors were setting up their stalls, testing equipment, arranging colorful displays of their wares. The food vendors filled the air with enticing smells: fresh coffee brewing, bread baking, meat grilling. Musicians were doing sound checks on the stage, creating random snippets of melody that drifted across the park. Children were already running around despite the early hour, excited by all the activity. Michael looked like he hadn't slept at all. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy, and he had a slightly wild look in his eyes. But he was smiling, checking items off on his tablet with feverish energy, greeting vendors, and generally radiating nervous excitement. "This is it," he said to Poppy, his voice slightly breathless. "By 9 o'clock, this place will be packed. Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." She spent the next 2 hours making final adjustments to her flowers, checking that all the barriers were secure and ensuring that the irrigation system was properly set up to handle the day's demands. The hanging baskets around the bandstand looked spectacular, having recovered fully from yesterday's rain. The roses bloomed in glorious profusion, their colors vibrant in the morning light, and even the simple lawn looked lush and inviting. At 8:30, the gates officially opened, and the first wave of festival goers arrived. Within minutes, the park began to fill with people. Families with young children in strollers, elderly couples walking arm in arm, teenagers in noisy groups, visitors from neighboring towns. They came in steady streams, filling the paths, browsing the vendor stalls, gathering near the stage where the first performance would begin at 10. Poppy had positioned herself near the rose garden, where she could keep an eye on the more delicate plants while staying somewhat apart from the main crowd. She had brought pruning shears and other tools, planning to stay busy with maintenance tasks throughout the day, using work as her anchor against anxiety. "Poppy!" Emma appeared, looking cheerful in a bright yellow sundress that made her look even younger than her 26 years. "The library stall is all set up. Come see when you have a chance." They walked together to the community center, where the library had taken over one entire room. Books covered every available surface, organized by genre and age group. A colorful sign advertised that all proceeds would go to the library's children's program. "This is impressive," Poppy said, genuinely amazed at the selection and organization. 3 years of donations. We had to rent extra storage space. Emma beamed with pride. "Will you have time to browse later? I set aside some gardening books I thought you might like." "I'll try to stop by, though I need to stay close to the park to keep an eye on things." By 10 o'clock, the festival was in full swing. The crowd had grown to at least 1,000 people, with more arriving every minute. Music played from the stage, where a local band performed bluegrass tunes with energetic enthusiasm. Children screamed with delight at the game area, where volunteers ran competitions and activities. The food stalls had lines of hungry customers, and the aroma of grilled food and fresh pastries filled the air. It was loud, chaotic, colorful, and overwhelming. Poppy felt her chest tighten with anxiety as she watched the crowds. This was exactly what she had feared. Too many people, too much noise, too much unpredictability. She focused on her breathing, using the techniques her therapist had taught her years ago. In through the nose, count to 4, hold. Out through the mouth, count to 4. Stay grounded in the present moment. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. "Excuse me, are you the gardener?" She turned to find a young woman with a camera and a press badge. "Yes, I'm Poppy, the park gardener. I'm with the Willowbrook Gazette. We're doing a feature on the festival, and we'd love to include some information about the park's beautiful flowers. Could I ask you a few questions?" The interview helped distract Poppy from her anxiety. She talked about the different plant varieties, explaining the difference between hybrid tea roses and floribundas, the planning that went into seasonal displays, and the work required to maintain a public park. The reporter took photos of the hanging baskets, the rose garden, and Poppy standing among her flowers, looking more at ease than she felt. After the reporter left, Poppy made a circuit of the park, checking on all the vulnerable areas. Some people had ignored the barriers around the flower beds, stepping into the gardens to take photos, and she had to politely redirect them. A few children had picked flowers, despite the clear signs asking them not to, but the damage was minimal. Overall, her preparations had worked well.
By noon, the crowd had swelled to what looked like over 2,000 people. The park was packed, every path filled with festival goers, every tent crowded with shoppers. The noise level had increased dramatically. Music from the stage, vendors calling out their wares, children playing, hundreds of conversations overlapping. Poppy retreated to a quieter corner near the pond, where the ducks seemed unperturbed by all the human activity, paddling contentedly in their familiar water. She sat on a bench, trying to calm her racing heart, when Tom from the coffee shop found her. "There you are. I've been looking all over. I brought you lunch." He handed her a sandwich and lemonade with his characteristic kindness. "You've been working all morning. You need to eat." "Thank you, Tom. That's very thoughtful." He sat beside her, and they watched the ducks for a moment in companionable silence. "You don't like crowds much, do you?" he asked gently, without judgment. "Is it that obvious?"
Only to someone who's paying attention. "I've noticed you've been circling the edges all morning, staying away from the densest areas." He took a sip of his own lemonade. "I'm the same way, actually. Too many people exhausts me, drains my energy. But I've learned that sometimes you just have to push through and do what needs to be done. That's what I'm trying to do. And you're succeeding. The park looks amazing, and I've heard at least a dozen people comment specifically on the flowers. You should be proud." They finished their lunch, and Tom headed back to his coffee stall, leaving Poppy feeling slightly better. She could do this. Just a few more hours, and then the festival would wind down, and she could have her peaceful park back. Chapter 8. The Discovery. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the festival had reached its peak. Mayor Patterson had announced that over 3,000 people were in attendance, making it the largest spring festival in Willowbrook's history. The success was evident everywhere. Full vendor stalls with long lines, enthusiastic crowds, children laughing and playing, musicians performing to attentive audiences. Poppy had finally allowed herself to relax a bit. Her flowers had survived the onslaught of people remarkably well. The barriers were holding. The irrigation system was working perfectly. Everything was going according to plan. She was starting to think she might actually make it through the day without a panic attack, might actually be able to enjoy some of the celebration. She was near the rose garden, showing a group of elderly women her favorite varieties and explaining the care each one required, when something caught her eye. Behind a cluster of particularly dense rose bushes, partially hidden by the thick foliage, was something that didn't belong there. A bag or package of some kind, brown canvas material, wedged carefully between the plants in a way that suggested deliberate placement rather than accidental loss. "Excuse me, ladies," she said, her mind suddenly sharp and focused in a way it hadn't been in 5 years. "I need to check on something. Please continue enjoying the roses."
She approached the bushes carefully, her heart beginning to race but not with anxiety this time. This was different. This was the hyper-focus she remembered from her old career, when every detail mattered, when observation could mean the difference between life and death. She knelt beside the bushes, using a small stick to gently move aside the foliage without touching anything directly. The package was about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in brown canvas secured with duct tape. Her trained eye immediately noticed details that would have meant nothing to most people. The careful wrapping with overlapping layers for reinforcement, the specific placement behind the densest part of the bush, where it wouldn't be visible from normal angles, the way it was positioned low to the ground to avoid detection. And then she saw the wires, thin, running along the side of the package where canvas met tape. Her blood ran cold, but her mind became absolutely clear. This wasn't trash discarded by a careless festival goer. This wasn't someone's forgotten belonging. This was a device, a bomb. She was looking at an improvised explosive device carefully hidden in a park filled with 3,000 innocent people. Poppy stood up slowly, carefully, her training taking over despite years away from this work. She looked around, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. Families everywhere. Young parents with babies in carriers, toddlers chasing each other through the grass, elderly couples sitting on nearby benches enjoying the music, groups of teenagers laughing together, children with balloons and ice cream. All of them in potential danger. All of them completely unaware of the threat hidden among the beautiful roses. She walked calmly to a less crowded area, forcing herself to appear normal, just another festival worker going about her duties. She pulled out her phone with hands that were shaking slightly, not from fear exactly, but from adrenaline, from muscle memory, from the sudden awakening of skills and instincts she thought she had left behind forever. Her first instinct was to call the police immediately, to report the device and evacuate everyone. But then what? 3,000 people in a limited space with only a few exit points. An evacuation would cause chaos, potentially panic. People could be trampled in the rush. Children could be separated from parents. And if the bomber was watching, and they might be waiting to see the reaction, the evacuation itself could trigger a remote detonation if the device had that capability. Number. She needed to assess the situation properly first, determine what she was actually dealing with. Then she could make an informed decision about how to proceed. But this was exactly what she had left behind 5 years ago. The thought of approaching that device, of examining it closely, of potentially having to disarm it, sent waves of fear through her body. She remembered standing in front of the bomb suit, unable to move. Remembered the terror that had paralyzed her. Remembered James finding her crying on the floor. She had frozen then. What if she froze now, with thousands of lives at stake? Her phone was still in her hand. She could see James's number in her contacts. He was 3 hours away, but he would know what to do. She could call him, get advice, maybe have him call in the police with proper bomb disposal units from the nearest city. That would be the safe choice, the responsible choice. But that would take hours. Hours during which this device could detonate. Hours during which 3,000 people remained in danger, completely unaware. She thought about Emma, probably still at the library bookstall, so excited about the festival's success. She thought about Michael, running around managing his dream festival, pouring his heart into making this community event special. She thought about the Chens, who had given her a job when she was broken and desperate. She thought about Tom, who brought her coffee and understood without asking too many questions. She thought about Mrs. Henderson, who walked her dog past this very spot every morning. She thought about all the families, the children, the innocent people who had come here today, just to enjoy a simple community celebration, to eat good food and listen to music and buy crafts and be together. And she thought about Catherine Carter, the bomb disposal expert who had saved hundreds of lives over 18 years of service. That person was still inside her, buried under 5 years of running and hiding and trying to forget. James had told her once that the brave, skilled, amazing person she was didn't disappear just because she changed careers. Maybe he was right. Maybe that person was still there, waiting for a moment when she was needed. Poppy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like the old bomb suit. She would not make the call. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly what they were dealing with. First, she needed to examine the device. She needed to use the skills and training that had defined her for 18 years. She needed to be Catherine Carter one more time.
Poppy returned to the rose garden, forcing herself to walk normally, to not draw attention, to appear like just another festival worker checking on the plants. The area was relatively quiet for the moment, though people passed by constantly on the nearby path, laughing and talking, completely unaware of what was hidden among the flowers. She knelt beside the rose bushes again, this time with clear purpose and focused intent. She pulled a small flashlight from her work bag. She always carried it for checking soil conditions in shaded areas, and used it to examine the device more carefully, her mind cataloging details with the precision of years of training. The construction was sophisticated. Not military grade, but far beyond the crude pipe bombs she had sometimes dealt with in her early career. Multiple components were visible, carefully connected with attention to detail that suggested knowledge and planning. This wasn't the work of someone playing a prank or trying to make a statement with a fake device. This was deliberate, potentially deadly, built by someone who knew what they were doing. She could see a digital timer with LED numbers, currently too shaded to read clearly. She could see what looked like a battery pack, probably 9-volt batteries wired in series to provide sufficient voltage. And she could see wires, red, blue, green, yellow, leading to what was almost certainly an explosive compound inside the sealed package. The specific type of explosive was impossible to determine without opening the package, which she absolutely would not do without proper equipment and safety measures. The question that mattered most: what kind of trigger system did it have? Was it just timer-based, counting down to a predetermined detonation? Or did it have anti-handling measures, pressure sensors, tilt switches, light sensors, designed to detonate immediately if anyone tried to move it or tamper with it? Or worse, did it have remote detonation capability, allowing the bomber to trigger it from a distance? She needed to see more, to understand the full picture before making any decisions. But she couldn't do a proper examination here, exposed and visible, with people walking by constantly. She needed her tools, her equipment. But she didn't have her bomb disposal kit anymore. That life was 5 years and 3,000 miles away. All she had were gardening tools and her knowledge. Actually, she realized, that wasn't true. She had 18 years of experience embedded in her muscle memory and mind. She had training that was as much mental as physical. She understood explosive devices, understood the logic of their construction, understood how bombers thought and planned. And she had successfully disarmed hundreds of devices during her career, working in conditions far more dangerous than a peaceful park on a sunny afternoon. She went to her truck, parked at the maintenance entrance, where she had arrived that morning. She opened her toolbox and surveyed its contents with new eyes. Wire cutters meant for pruning rose stems, small pliers for delicate work on plant supports, a multimeter she used for checking irrigation timer circuits, a magnifying glass for examining plant diseases, various screwdrivers, tweezers, and other implements. Not proper bomb disposal equipment. No radio-controlled robots, no blast containment units, no X-ray machines, but better than nothing, possibly enough. She also grabbed a pair of thick leather gardening gloves, a ground cloth she used for kneeling while planting, and her work jacket. Then she returned to the rose garden, her heart pounding but her hands steady, her mind clear and focused in a way it hadn't been in 5 years. This time, she positioned herself between the device and the main path, using her body to block the view of anyone walking by. She spread the ground cloth on the grass and carefully, moving slowly and deliberately, began to examine the device more closely with her tools. The timer showed 17 minutes. 17 minutes until detonation. Her heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline flooding her system, but her hands remained steady. Muscle memory was taking over, all those years of training guiding her movements automatically, her body remembering what her conscious mind had tried to forget. She could see the trigger system more clearly now, using the magnifying glass to examine details. It was timer-based. The digital display confirmed that. But there were also pressure sensors visible on the package itself, small electronic components that would detect any change in weight or position. If she tried to move the package or lift it, those sensors would trigger immediate detonation. Anti-handling measures, designed to kill anyone who tried to interfere. This was a sophisticated device, built by someone who knew what they were doing, who had studied bomb construction, who wanted to ensure maximum damage and prevent disarmament. The good news, if there was any good news in this situation, was that she could see no evidence of remote detonation capability. No antenna, no wireless receiver, no additional circuits that would suggest remote control. The device would go off when the timer reached 0, but it wasn't being monitored or controlled from elsewhere. That meant the bomber probably wasn't watching, waiting to detonate if they saw police or evacuation. That gave her options. But the question remained, could she stop it? Could she disarm it using only gardening tools and half-forgotten training? And more importantly, could she do it without triggering the anti-handling measures that would kill her and everyone nearby? 15 minutes on the timer. Time was running out, and she needed to make a decision. 15 minutes remaining on the digital timer, the numbers counting down with mechanical precision. Poppy sat back on her heels, her mind racing through options with the speed and clarity that had made her one of the best in her unit. Option 1. Call for immediate evacuation, but with 3,000 people in a limited space with only a few exit points. A panic evacuation could result in stampedes, injuries, potentially deaths from trampling and crushing in narrow passages. Children separated from parents in the chaos. Elderly people knocked down in the rush. and 15 minutes wasn't enough time to evacuate safely. People would still be in the danger zone when the device detonated. Option 2. Call the police and request the bomb disposal team. But the nearest bomb disposal unit was in the city, at least 90 minutes away even with emergency response protocols. The device would detonate long before they could arrive, long before they could even assess the situation. This option would give her official backup and proper equipment, but it wouldn't save anyone. Option 3. Attempt to disarm it herself. This was the most dangerous option, especially given her psychological state and her history. She had frozen the last time, had been unable to even put on the bomb suit. What if she froze now, with thousands of lives depending on her? What if her hands started shaking at the critical moment? What if the trauma paralyzed her again? But it was also the only option that didn't involve accepting casualties, the only option that gave these innocent people a chance. 13 minutes remaining. The device was sophisticated in design but fairly straightforward in construction once you understood it. She could see the main components clearly now. The timer controlling the countdown, the battery pack providing power, the explosive compound in the sealed container, the detonator that would trigger the explosion, and the pressure sensors serving as anti-handling protection. To safely disarm it, she needed to interrupt the circuit between the timer and the detonator without triggering the pressure sensors.
The problem was that the pressure sensors were connected to the same power source. If she cut the wrong wire, or if her hand trembled at the wrong moment, or if she made any of the dozen possible mistakes that haunted her nightmares, the device would detonate immediately. She would die. So would anyone nearby. And even if casualties were minimal due to the device's position behind the roses, somewhat shielded by the concrete bandstand, she would have failed again. Failed worse than Manchester, because this time she had chosen to intervene and had made it worse. 11 minutes remaining. "Think, Catherine," she whispered to herself, deliberately using her old name, her old identity. This situation didn't call for Poppy the gardener. It called for Catherine Carter, bomb disposal specialist, the person who had successfully disarmed hundreds of devices, who had received commendations for bravery under fire, who had trained young technicians and saved countless lives. But that was before Manchester, before the failure that had broken something fundamental inside her, before the explosion that had ended her career and nearly ended her life, before the fear took root so deeply that it seemed impossible to ever remove. Her hands began to shake, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded a panic attack. The world seemed to tilt slightly, and for a moment, she was back in that parking garage 5 years ago, hearing the countdown that ended in fire and pain, feeling the blast throw her against concrete, watching her career burn in the flames. 10 minutes remaining. "No," she said firmly, more loudly than she intended. A couple walking past the rose garden looked at her curiously, but she didn't care. "Not now. I can't fall apart now. Too many people are depending on me." She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, using every calming technique she had learned in 5 years of therapy. Ground yourself in the present moment. Feel the grass beneath your knees, real and solid. Hear the music from the festival, the sound of children laughing, the murmur of happy crowds. Smell the roses, their sweet perfume mixing with the scent of food from the stalls. You are not in Manchester. You are in Willowbrook, and people need you. People who have been kind to you, who have given you a home and a second chance. You can do this. You must do this. When she opened her eyes, her hands had stopped shaking. The panic was still there, lurking at the edges of her consciousness like a predator waiting for weakness, but she had pushed it back into its cage. She could do this. She had to do this. There was no other option that didn't involve people dying. 9 minutes remaining. She picked up the wire cutters from her toolbox. The tool felt familiar in her hand, despite being meant for pruning rose stems rather than cutting bomb wires. The principle was the same: careful, precise cutting. She would have to be extra cautious since these cutters didn't have the surgical precision of her old equipment, but they were sharp and she was skilled. Using the magnifying glass, she examined the wire configuration more closely, her training helping her trace each connection, understand each circuit. There were 4 wires visible: red, blue, green, and yellow. Standard color coding in theory, though she knew from experience that bombers often reversed expected patterns to trap inexperienced technicians who relied on assumptions rather than careful analysis. The red wire appeared to be the power connection from the battery pack to the timer, providing the electrical current that kept the countdown running. The blue wire ran from the timer to the detonator, carrying the signal that would trigger the explosion when the countdown reached 0. The green and yellow wires were part of the pressure sensor system, creating a fail-safe circuit that would detonate the device if it detected tampering or movement. In theory, cutting the blue wire would break the connection between the timer and the detonator, rendering the device harmless even when the countdown reached 0. The timer would continue counting down. It was on a separate circuit. But without the connection to the detonator, nothing would happen. The explosive material would remain inert, and the device could be safely removed by professionals with proper equipment. But, and this was a crucial but, if the pressure sensors detected any movement or any change in the system's electrical characteristics while she was working, they would complete their own circuit and trigger the detonator directly, bypassing the timer entirely. The anti-handling measures were designed exactly for this scenario, to punish anyone trying to be a hero. 8 minutes remaining. Poppy looked around the park one more time, taking in the scene that had become so familiar over 5 years. A little girl ran past with a bright red balloon, her laughter pure and joyful. An elderly couple sat on a nearby bench, holding hands and watching the crowds with contented smiles. Michael rushed by in the distance, talking animatedly on his phone, probably dealing with some minor festival crisis that seemed important, only because he didn't know about the real crisis hidden among the roses. All of them were depending on her, and they didn't even know it. They had no idea that their lives hung in the balance, that the next few minutes would determine whether they went home safely tonight or became statistics in tomorrow's news reports. She couldn't let them down. She wouldn't let them down. 7 minutes remaining. Her hands were steady now. Her breathing was controlled. All the fear, all the trauma, all the doubt and self-recrimination from 5 years of hiding, she pushed it all aside, locked it away in a mental compartment to be dealt with later. Right now, in this moment, she was not Poppy the gardener struggling with PTSD and panic attacks. She was Catherine Carter, bomb disposal specialist, and she had a job to do. She positioned the wire cutters carefully around the blue wire, the metal blades just touching the insulation, not cutting yet, but ready. She double-checked her assessment, traced the wires again with her eyes, confirmed that this was the right choice. Cut the blue wire. Interrupt the detonation circuit. Save everyone. But don't trigger the pressure sensors in the process. 6 minutes and 30 seconds remaining. She began to apply pressure to the wire cutters, moving slowly, steadily, watching carefully for any sign that something was wrong, ready to stop immediately if the device showed any reaction. Time to find out if 5 years away from this work had dulled her skills, or if, like riding a bicycle, some things you never really forget. 6 minutes and 30 seconds remaining on the digital timer. The numbers glowed red in the shadow of the rose bushes, counting down to devastation with mechanical indifference. Before cutting, Poppy paused to triple-check her assessment. Years of training had taught her that the moment before action was when mistakes were most likely to occur. Overconfidence, rushing, making assumptions, these were what killed technicians. She forced herself to slow down, to breathe, to look one more time. The blue wire was definitely the connection from timer to detonator. The pressure sensors were on a separate circuit, connected by the green and yellow wires. The power supply fed everything through the red wire. Cutting the blue wire should, the word should echoed ominously in her mind, interrupt the detonation sequence without triggering the pressure sensors. But should was not will. There could be hidden components she couldn't see, additional fail-safes buried inside the package, secondary triggers designed to catch someone making exactly this move. The person who built this device was knowledgeable and careful. They wouldn't make it too easy. 6 minutes remaining, she examined the area where the wires entered the main package, looking for any sign of additional connections, any hint of other trigger mechanisms she might have missed. The lighting wasn't perfect here in the shadows of the rose bushes, but she couldn't risk moving the device into better light. Any movement could trigger the pressure sensors. Using her flashlight, she peered into the gaps between the package components, looking for anything unusual. Everything she could see confirmed her analysis. The blue wire was the primary detonation circuit. The pressure sensors were separate. The system was elegant in its simplicity, which ironically made it more reliable and more dangerous. 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Time was running out. She needed to make a decision and commit to it. Second-guessing herself now, wasting precious seconds on doubt, would only increase the risk of mistakes born from rushing at the last moment. She positioned the wire cutters once more, ensuring they were aligned to cut cleanly through the blue wire without touching anything else. The cutters were sharp. She always kept her tools in perfect condition, a habit from her military days that had carried into her gardening work. But they were bulkier than the precision instruments she had used in her bomb disposal career. She would need to be extra careful. 5 minutes remaining. "Here we go," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. A prayer, maybe? Or an affirmation? Or simply an acknowledgement of the moment? She began to apply pressure to the cutters, slowly, steadily, watching the wire begin to compress under the blades. She could feel the resistance, the give of the insulation, and then the stronger resistance of the copper conductor inside. She watched carefully, ready to stop immediately if anything seemed wrong, if any other wire shifted, if the device showed any sign of reaction to what she was doing. 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The wire was resisting more than she expected. These garden cutters weren't designed for cutting metal wire, and the conductor was thicker than it looked. She increased the pressure gradually, not wanting to make any sudden movements that might jostle the device or create vibrations that the pressure sensors could detect. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Sweat ran down her face despite the comfortable temperature. Her arms ached from holding the awkward position, trying to maintain steady pressure without jerking or slipping. She thought briefly about all the times she had done this in her old career. Hundreds of devices, hundreds of cuts just like this one. But never before had she felt so acutely aware of every detail, every potential point of failure. With a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in her heightened state of awareness, the wire cut through. The blue wire's ends separated cleanly, breaking the circuit between timer and detonator. Poppy held her breath, waiting, watching. If she had been wrong about anything, if there were hidden triggers, if the pressure sensors were more sensitive than she thought, if the bomber had anticipated this exact intervention, the device would detonate now. She watched the timer display, watched for any change, any sign of activity from the other components. 4 minutes and 15 seconds. 4 minutes. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. The timer continued counting down, its digital display unchanging except for the steadily decreasing numbers. But the countdown no longer mattered. With the connection severed, It could reach 0 without triggering the detonator. The timer was now just a clock, counting down to nothing. Except for the pressure sensors, 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The anti-handling measures were still active and dangerous. The device couldn't detonate through the timer circuit anymore, but if anyone moved it or triggered the pressure sensors, the backup detonation system would still work. She had only completed half the job. The device was safer than before. It wouldn't explode when the timer reached 0, but it was still a bomb, still dangerous, still capable of killing anyone who disturbed it. She examined the pressure sensors more carefully now, using the magnifying glass to study their construction and placement. There were 2 of them, small electronic components about the size of a coin, attached to the bottom of the package with industrial adhesive. They were the kind used in burglar alarms, designed to detect any change in position or pressure. Tilt sensors combined with weight sensors, creating a redundant system that was difficult to fool. 3 minutes remaining. To fully disarm the device, she needed to disable these sensors. But they were under the package, which she couldn't move without triggering them. It was the classic catch-22 that bombers loved. To disable the sensors, she needed to access them, but accessing them would trigger them, unless she could freeze them in place somehow, keep them from detecting movement even when the package moved. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Poppy thought quickly, her mind racing through physics and electronics principles she had studied years ago. Pressure sensors worked by detecting changes in electrical resistance caused by physical deformation. A small plate or membrane inside the sensor would flex under pressure or movement, changing its distance from an electrical contact, altering the circuit's resistance. The sensor would detect this change and send a signal to the detonator. If she could keep the sensors from deforming, keep the internal components physically locked in place, they couldn't trigger even if the package moved. But how could she do that with only gardening supplies? She looked at what she had available: wire cutters, pliers, tape, a multimeter, a flashlight, and her knowledge. And then an idea formed, risky, but potentially workable. 2 minutes remaining. She retrieved the roll of duct tape from her truck, moving quickly now. She also grabbed a thin piece of plywood she used for kneeling on wet ground while gardening. When she returned to the device, the timer showed 1 minute and 45 seconds remaining. Not that the timer mattered anymore, but the countdown created a psychological pressure, a reminder that time was always a factor. Working carefully, she slid the edge of the plywood under one side of the package, just barely lifting that corner. The pressure sensors were on the bottom, but they only triggered on significant changes in pressure or sudden movements. A tiny, gradual lifting, slow enough that it took 30 seconds to raise the package a few millimeters, shouldn't register as a threat to the sensor's programming. 1 minute and 30 seconds. She moved so slowly that her muscles trembled from the sustained effort, from holding the awkward position while maintaining absolute control. Millimeter by millimeter, she worked the plywood under the package, creating a tiny gap between the device and the ground. She watched the device carefully for any sign of reaction, any sound, any flash of light, any indication that she had triggered something. 1 minute remaining. With the gap created, she could now see the pressure sensors more clearly. They were positioned on opposite corners of the package's bottom, creating a balanced detection system that would be difficult to fool. To disable them, she needed to either cut their wires, which would require moving the package more, too dangerous, or prevent them from registering movement. Using the duct tape, she carefully placed strips under the edges of the package, building up layers that would support the sensors and prevent them from compressing or tilting if the package was moved. It was delicate work, requiring her to slide the tape into position without disturbing the device or causing vibrations that might be detected. 30 seconds remaining on the timer. She worked as quickly as she dared, adding more tape, building a supportive structure underneath the device. If this worked, the sensors would be held firmly in place by the tape, unable to move or compress even if someone picked up the package. They would detect no change in their position or the pressure on them, and therefore wouldn't trigger. 15 seconds. One final strip of tape, positioned carefully to complete the support structure. The sensors were now held securely between the tape underneath and the weight of the device above, unable to move or flex, locked in their current position. 10 seconds. She sat back slightly, her work complete, waiting to see if her improvised solution would hold. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1. The timer reached 0, the display showing 00:00 in red digital numbers. Nothing happened. The device sat inert among the roses, its timer display blinking zeros, its circuits interrupted, its sensors immobilized. It was no longer a threat. The explosive material inside remained stable and harmless without the detonator to trigger it. The device had been successfully disarmed using nothing but gardening tools, duct tape, and 18 years of half-forgotten training combined with clear thinking under extreme pressure.
Poppy sat back on the ground cloth, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed, her entire body trembling with reaction. Adrenaline that had kept her focused and steady was now flooding her system with nowhere to go, leaving her weak and dizzy. She had done it. Against all odds, despite her fears and trauma, and 5 years away from this work, she had successfully disarmed a live explosive device. She looked around at the festival, continuing obliviously around her. Children still laughed and played. Music still drifted from the stage. Vendors still called out to customers. No one knew. No one except her would ever know how close they had all come to disaster. For a long moment, she just sat there in the grass beside the now harmless device, trying to process what had just happened, trying to reconcile the person she had been 5 years ago with the person she was now, trying to understand what this meant for her future. But first, she needed to call the police. The device was safe now, but it still needed to be removed by professionals who had proper equipment and training. And there was a bomber out there somewhere who needed to be found and stopped before they could try again. She pulled out her phone with hands that still trembled slightly and dialed emergency services. "This is Poppy Carter, head gardener at Willowbrook Park. I need to report an explosive device that has been made safe, but requires proper disposal by bomb disposal experts." The dispatcher sounded confused at first, as if unable to process what she was hearing. "Ma'am, did you say an explosive device?" "Yes. In Willowbrook Park, during the Spring Festival. I've disabled it, but it needs to be removed by professionals. Please send officers and contact the bomb disposal unit from the city." Poppy was surprised by how steady her voice sounded, how calm she appeared, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Are you saying there's a bomb at the festival right now?" The dispatcher's voice rose with alarm. "There was. It's no longer a threat, I've disarmed it, but we need to secure the area and remove it properly. I'm by the rose garden near the bandstand. Have the officers ask for Poppy when they arrive? And please," she added, "try to be discreet. There's no need to cause panic among the festival goers." After ending the call with emergency services, Poppy called Michael. "Michael, I need you to come to the rose garden, immediately please, and come alone." "Poppy? What's wrong? Are the flowers okay?" His voice carried the slight edge of someone who had been dealing with minor crises all day and was bracing for another one. "Just come, please. It's urgent, more urgent than you can imagine." While waiting, Poppy carefully photographed the device from multiple angles with her phone, documenting its construction, the severed blue wire, the tape supporting the pressure sensors, the positioning among the roses. She also took photos of the surrounding area, noting the proximity to where crowds had been thickest. This evidence would be important for the investigation, for understanding who had built this device, why they had chosen this location, and how close the festival had come to tragedy. Michael arrived within minutes, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the park. "What's going on?" "You sounded really serious on the phone." Poppy gestured to the device, still partially hidden among the rose bushes. "Don't touch it. Just look." Michael stared at the package, not comprehending at first. His mind was still in festival management mode, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. What is that? Some kind of equipment?" "A bomb, or it was. I've disabled it." Poppy kept her voice low and steady, trying to project calm even as she watched his face process the information. His face went white, the color draining so quickly she thought he might faint. "A bomb? Here? During the festival? Oh my God. Oh my God." His voice was rising toward panic, his breath coming faster. "Michael, stay calm," Poppy said firmly, using the command voice she had learned in the military. "It's safe now. No one is in danger. But the police are coming, and we need to handle this carefully to avoid causing a stampede." "You disabled a bomb?" He was looking at her like he had never seen her before, his eyes wide with shock. "How? Why? Who are you?" "I'll explain everything later. Right now, we need to think about logistics. The police will want to secure this area and probably evacuate the immediate vicinity. We need to do it calmly and gradually, without causing panic in the main crowd." 2 police officers arrived quickly, their cruiser pulling up to the maintenance entrance with lights flashing but no siren. Officer Martinez and Officer Chen approached cautiously, hands near their weapons, clearly not entirely sure what they were responding to. They looked skeptical until they saw the device. Officer Martinez immediately radioed for backup and the bomb disposal team, while Officer Chen began asking Poppy questions, his professional demeanor barely concealing his shock. "Ma'am, you said you disabled this device yourself? How did you know what to do?" "I have training in explosive device disposal. I was in the military for 18 years, bomb disposal specialist." The words felt strange coming out after 5 years of keeping this secret. 5 years of being just Poppy the gardener. Officer Chen's skepticism turned instantly to respect. "And you're sure it's safe now?" "The detonation circuit has been severed, and the anti-handling measures have been neutralized, but it still contains explosive material and should be handled by professionals with proper equipment. I didn't want to move it myself or disturb it more than necessary." More officers arrived, along with Mayor Patterson, who looked like he might have a heart attack when he saw what was happening. Michael was explaining the situation to him in urgent whispers, and the mayor's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, fear, confusion, and finally a kind of stunned gratitude. "We need to evacuate this section of the park," Officer Martinez said, taking charge of the situation. Gradually, calmly. "Can you help us figure out the best way to do that without causing panic?" Poppy and the officers worked out a plan together. They would slowly move people away from the Rose Garden area, using the excuse that they needed to close that section for maintenance. The festival would continue in other areas of the park, and most people would never know what had happened. No announcements, no sirens, no drama that might cause panic. It took about 30 minutes to clear the immediate area. The officers set up barriers and posted guards, preventing anyone from approaching the Rose Garden. The bomb disposal team from the city was en route but would take at least an hour to arrive. During this time, word began to spread among the festival organizers about what had happened. People arrived in small groups, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and concern. Sarah and Robert Chen appeared, looking worried. Tom from the coffee shop came, bringing water for everyone. Emma arrived, her face pale, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Poppy, they're saying there was a bomb. Is that true?" Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Poppy nodded. "It's true. But it's safe now. Everyone is safe." "And you disabled it?" Emma's eyes were wide with something between awe and disbelief. "How? I mean, you're a gardener." "I used to be other things before I was a gardener." It was the same answer she had given before, but now it carried a different weight, a revelation of truth that had been hidden for 5 years. Emma stared at her for a long moment, processing this information, trying to reconcile the quiet gardener she knew with someone capable of disarming bombs. Then she stepped forward and hugged Poppy tightly, fiercely, as if afraid to let go. "You saved everyone. You saved all of us." Emma's voice was muffled against Poppy's shoulder. "We could have died. All those people, all those children, and you saved us." Poppy felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "I just did what needed to be done." But even as she said it, she knew it was more than that. She had faced her greatest fear and not only survived, but succeeded. She had proven to herself that the trauma hadn't destroyed her, that Catherine Carter still existed somewhere inside Poppy the gardener, that she could still function under pressure when lives depended on it. The bomb disposal team arrived just before 4 o'clock. 2 technicians in full protective gear, professional and thorough. They examined Poppy's work carefully, took additional photos, and then carefully removed the device for transport and analysis. The senior technician, a woman named Captain Reynolds, asked to speak with Poppy privately. "Officer Martinez filled me in on your background," Captain Reynolds said, her voice carrying professional respect. "Royal Navy EOD, 18 years of service. Your disarmament work is textbook perfect, exactly what they teach at Raleigh. I trained there, completed my certification in 2005. Captain Reynolds smiled with recognition. "I did an exchange training program there in 2010. Small world." Her expression became more serious. "This was excellent work, especially given your resources and the circumstances. You saved a lot of lives today, Poppy. Maybe hundreds. I did what needed to be done. It was more than that. You stayed calm under pressure, made correct assessments, and executed flawlessly with improvised equipment. That takes training, yes, but also courage, especially if you're dealing with PTSD from a previous incident." Captain Reynolds' eyes showed understanding. She had probably worked with trauma survivors before, knew the signs. Poppy felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. It was terrifying. Every moment I thought I was going to fail, that it would explode, that I would die or hurt others because I wasn't good enough anymore. But you didn't fail. You succeeded brilliantly. And do you know what that means? Captain Reynolds handed her a card. It means you still have the skills, the courage, and the capability that made you exceptional in the first place. The incident that caused your PTSD didn't destroy that, no matter how much you might have thought it did. If you ever want to talk, or if you're interested in consulting work for our unit, training new technicians, sharing your experience, contact me. We could use someone with your skills and experience. After the bomb disposal team left with the device secured in a containment vessel, Mayor Patterson called an impromptu meeting with all the festival organizers in the community center. They gathered in a small room away from the festival crowds to discuss what had happened and how to proceed. "The police have advised us that there's no evidence of additional devices," the mayor said, his voice still shaky with emotion. "They believe this was an isolated incident. The festival can continue, but we need to decide how to handle the information." Officer Martinez added, "We're increasing police presence and will continue monitoring the area. But for now, the immediate danger is over, thanks to Ms. Carter's quick thinking and expertise." Michael spoke up, his voice stronger now that the initial shock had passed. "Should we tell people what happened? Make an announcement?" "That's a complicated question," the mayor replied. "On one hand, people have a right to know. On the other hand, announcing it now could cause panic and ruin what has otherwise been a successful festival. My suggestion is that we continue the festival as planned, increase security discreetly, and then release a statement tomorrow when everyone is safely home and can process the information calmly." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. Then Emma stood up, her voice clear despite the emotion evident on her face. But we need to acknowledge Poppy's actions. She saved everyone here today. That shouldn't be hidden or minimized. All eyes turned to Poppy, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the room. She shook her head. I don't need acknowledgement. I'm just glad everyone is safe. That's all that matters. But you're a hero, Emma insisted, her voice passionate. People should know what you did, who you are. Emma, I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm not comfortable with being called a hero. I used my training to address a dangerous situation. That's all. Poppy's voice was firm but not unkind. I came to Willowbrook to live quietly, to leave my past behind. I'm not looking for recognition or attention. The mayor looked at her thoughtfully, seeing something in her expression that the others might have missed. Ms. Carter, I respect your humility and your desire for privacy, but Emma is right about one thing. What you did today was extraordinary. When the story comes out, and it will come out, these things always do, you'll be seen as the hero you are, whether you want that recognition or not. The question isn't whether to acknowledge your actions, but how to do so in a way that respects your wishes while also allowing this community to express its gratitude. Poppy was silent for a moment, processing his words. She had known that her secret couldn't remain hidden after today, that people would ask questions, that her past would become public knowledge. But the reality of it was still daunting. I understand. For now, can we just focus on finishing the festival safely? We can figure out the rest later. The meeting concluded with everyone agreeing to continue the festival without public announcements, to increase security quietly, and to release information the following day. As people filed out, several approached Poppy individually to thank her, to express their amazement, to ask questions she mostly deflected. Robert Chen was among the last to approach, his usual quiet manner unchanged by the day's drama. You know, Poppy, Sarah and I always knew there was something special about you. We didn't know what, but we knew. Today just confirmed it. I'm still the same person I was this morning, Robert. Are you? He asked gently. Or maybe you're finally allowing yourself to be all of who you are instead of just part of it. Think about that.
His words stayed with her as she finally left the community center and returned to the festival, which was still in full swing despite everything that had happened. Most of the 3,000 people there had no idea how close they had come to disaster, and Poppy was glad of that. Let them enjoy their day, their music and food and simple pleasures. That's what she had fought for. Not recognition, not gratitude, but the simple continuation of normal, happy life. The rest of the festival passed in a strange blur for Poppy. She tried to return to her normal duties, checking on flower beds and maintaining barriers, but people kept approaching her. Word had spread among the volunteers and organizers, and everyone wanted to thank her, to express their amazement, to hear the story directly from her. Tom found her near the pond as the sun was setting, bringing her a cup of coffee and a sandwich. You haven't eaten in hours. Sit with me for a minute. They sat on a bench, and for a while, neither spoke. Finally, Tom said, "You saved my life today. And Emma's life, and the Chen's lives, and hundreds of others. I don't know how to even begin to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me, Tom. I just did what I was trained to do. But you've been away from that training for 5 years, dealing with trauma from your past, facing that fear, confronting something that terrified you, choosing to act despite being afraid. That's not just training. That's courage of the highest order." Tom looked at her seriously. "You're a hero, Poppy. I know you don't like that word, but it's true. And more than that, you're a good person who put others before yourself when it mattered most. That's rare and precious." Poppy felt her throat tighten with emotion. I was so scared, Tom. Every second while I was working on that device, I thought I was going to fail, that I would freeze like I did 5 years ago. The fear was almost paralyzing. But you didn't let it paralyze you. You pushed through it. That's what makes it courage rather than just competence. As evening fell and the festival began to wind down, Poppy helped with cleanup efforts, grateful for the familiar physical work that kept her hands busy and her mind focused. Emma stayed close, helping without being intrusive, providing silent support through her presence. "I'm sorry I called you out in that meeting," Emma said as they picked up trash near the rose garden. "I know you value your privacy. I was so overwhelmed by what you did, by how close we all came to dying. I wanted everyone to know." "I understand, Emma. I'm not angry. I know my secret couldn't stay hidden after today." Poppy paused in her work, looking at the rose garden where the device had been hidden just hours before. "I came to Willowbrook to escape my past, to be someone different. But maybe Robert is right. Maybe I was just hiding part of who I am instead of integrating all of it." "You're not just a gardener, and you're not just a bomb disposal expert," Emma said thoughtfully. "You're both of those things and more. A friend, a teacher, someone who makes this town better just by being in it. All those parts are you, Poppy. They all matter." That night, Poppy drove home to her cottage as the last festival goers were leaving. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but also strangely energized. She had faced her greatest fear and survived. She had proven to herself that she wasn't broken, that the trauma hadn't destroyed her capabilities, that Catherine Carter still existed within Poppy the gardener. She made herself tea and sat on her porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Her phone had been ringing all evening, reporters who had somehow gotten her number, former colleagues who had heard the news, even James, her old partner, who had left 3 voicemails saying he was proud of her. But she didn't want to talk to anyone tonight. Tonight, she just wanted to sit in the quiet dark and process everything that had happened, everything that it meant for her future. She thought about Catherine Carter, the confident bomb disposal expert who had never questioned her abilities or her courage. She thought about that person's last day in Manchester, the explosion that had ended that identity. She thought about Poppy, the frightened veteran who had fled to Willowbrook, seeking only peace and anonymity. And she thought about who she was now, some synthesis of both, neither purely one nor the other. The question was, who did she want to be going forward? Could she go back to being just a quiet gardener after today? Or had something fundamental changed? Did she want to return to that simple, peaceful existence? Or was there something more she needed to do? She didn't have answers yet. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt like maybe she didn't have to choose between Catherine and Poppy. Maybe she could be both. Maybe that was the lesson of today, that you can't run from yourself, that all your experiences and identities are part of who you are, and that true peace comes from integration rather than denial. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The news would spread, reporters would want interviews, her private past would become public. But tonight, she sat in the dark and allowed herself to feel proud of what she had accomplished. She had saved lives. She had faced her trauma and not let it defeat her. She had been brave when courage was required. And that was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. The next morning arrived with a strange mix of normalcy and chaos. Poppy woke early, made her coffee, and sat on her porch watching the sunrise, much as she did every morning. But her phone was already buzzing with messages and calls. The story had broken overnight. Local news first, then regional, then national. The headline was everywhere. Former military bomb expert saves Spring Festival. Gardener's secret past revealed. She sighed and turned off her phone. She would deal with the media attention eventually, but not yet. First, she needed to go to the park and check on her flowers. Some things remained constant, even when your world was turning upside down. The park was quiet in the early morning, peaceful in a way it hadn't been during yesterday's festival chaos. Poppy walked through the space, checking flower beds, noting areas that needed attention after being trampled by thousands of feet. The roses where she had found the device looked slightly worse for wear. Some had been inadvertently damaged when the police set up their barriers, but most were fine. She was kneeling beside the rose garden, already starting to repair the damage, when Mayor Patterson found her. "I hoped I'd find you here," he said, slightly out of breath from walking quickly. "Poppy, I know you probably want some peace, but we need to talk about what happens next." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "The news stories? Those, yes, but also practical matters. The town council held an emergency meeting this morning. I know Sunday morning meetings are unprecedented, but these are unprecedented circumstances." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We want to formally recognize your actions. A commendation, possibly a key to the city, a special council meeting in 2 weeks where we can properly thank you and acknowledge what you did." "Mayor, I know you don't need it, but the town needs it, Poppy. The people need to be able to express their gratitude, to process what happened, to celebrate that everyone is safe because of you. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the community healing from a trauma, even if most people didn't know about the trauma until it was already over." She understood his point, even if she didn't like it. "All right, a council meeting, but nothing too elaborate, please. I came here for a quiet life, and I'd like to maintain as much of that as possible. We'll keep it tasteful and respectful of your wishes. Thank you, Poppy." He started to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. The investigation is ongoing, but the police wanted me to tell you that they've traced some of the bomb materials. They think they'll have a suspect in custody within a few days. Your photographs and observations were apparently very helpful." After he left, Poppy continued her work in the park, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of gardening. But her solitude didn't last long. People kept arriving. Friends, neighbors, curious townspeople who had seen the news and wanted to see where it had happened. Mrs. Henderson came with her dog, giving Poppy a long hug. "I walk past this very spot every morning. I could have been here when that terrible thing exploded. You saved my life, dear." "But it didn't explode, Mrs. Henderson. Everything is fine."
Because of you. You're a true hero, Poppy Carter. Don't you dare try to minimize what you did. The Chens arrived mid-morning with breakfast from the bakery. They sat with Poppy on a park bench, and Robert said, "We're proud to have known you, Poppy. Proud to have been part of your healing journey. You gave me more than a job when I arrived here 5 years ago," Poppy said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance when I was broken, taught me a new profession, treated me with kindness and respect. You helped make me who I am now." "And who you are now," Sarah said warmly, "is someone who integrates strength with gentleness, courage with humility, a powerful past with a peaceful present. You're exactly who you should be." By afternoon, Poppy had accepted that she wouldn't have any privacy today. She gave a short interview to the local newspaper, providing basic information about her military background and the events of yesterday, while declining to discuss the specific details of her PTSD or the Manchester incident. She spoke with the police investigators, providing technical information about the device's construction that might help identify the bomber. And she talked with Emma, who came to the park with coffee and simply sat beside her for a while without saying anything. Finally, Emma asked, "Are you okay? Really okay?" "I don't know yet," Poppy admitted. Yesterday, I faced something I thought I'd never face again. I proved to myself that I could do it, that the trauma hasn't destroyed me, but I don't know what that means for my future. Do I try to go back to my quiet life? Do I embrace this other part of who I am? I'm not sure. Maybe you don't have to decide right away. Maybe you can just take it one day at a time, see where the path leads. Emma smiled. You're allowed to just be present in the moment, Poppy. You don't have to have all the answers immediately. As the sun set on this strange, difficult day, Poppy walked through the park one more time before heading home. She paused at the Rose Garden memorial spot, touching the roses gently. Yesterday, this had been a place of hidden danger. Today, it was just a garden again, beautiful and peaceful, but it would always carry the memory of what had happened here. Just as Poppy would always carry the memory of both her success and her past failures. The question was, how to carry those memories, as burdens that weighed her down, or as lessons that made her stronger. She was beginning to think it might be possible to choose the latter. 5 years later, 5 years after the festival bombing, Poppy woke early and drove to the park to watch the sunrise from the memorial bench. It had become a personal tradition, this quiet morning reflection on the anniversary of the day that had changed everything. She sat watching the sky lighten from deep blue to pink to gold, the roses around her blooming abundantly. In the distance, the town was beginning to wake, just as it had every morning for the decade she had lived here. She thought about Catherine Carter, the person she had been, brave, skilled, dedicated. That person had done important work and saved many lives. She honored that person and no longer tried to distance herself from that identity. She thought about Poppy, the frightened veteran who had arrived in Willowbrook seeking only to hide and heal. That person had been necessary too, deserving of compassion and understanding. And she thought about who she was now, a synthesis of both and more. Over the past 5 years, her life had transformed in ways she never could have predicted. She had accepted Robert and Sarah Chen's offer to buy the garden center. It thrived under her management, and she had turned it into more than just a business. It was now a training center where veterans could learn horticulture as therapy, working with plants as part of their healing process. 3 veterans were currently working there, finding purpose and peace in growing things.
She had also become a consultant for the bomb disposal unit, teaching monthly training sessions for new technicians. She shared her experiences, both successful and traumatic, helping them understand not just the technical aspects of the work, but the psychological demands. She had even testified before Congress about veteran support programs, advocating for nature-based therapy and better mental health resources. Her book, Growing Through Trauma, A Veteran's Journey from Bombs to Blooms, had been published 3 years ago and was now used in military psychology courses and veteran support programs. She received letters regularly from people who said the book had helped them find hope, had shown them that trauma doesn't have to be the end of their story. And personally, her life had deepened and expanded. She and Tom had married 2 years ago, a quiet ceremony in the park with just close friends attending. Emma had been her maid of honor, and James, her old bomb disposal partner, had traveled from England to attend. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emma. 5 years ago today, you saved an entire town. Every day since, you've been saving people through your work and example. Coffee later to celebrate? She replied, Absolutely. Thank you for being the best friend anyone could ask for. As the sun rose fully, Poppy stood and walked through the park. The spring festival would be held this afternoon. It had become an annual tradition, though now with extensive security measures. She wasn't as involved in the preparations anymore, having hired a younger assistant to manage the day-to-day park maintenance. But she would be there, walking among the crowds with ease now, comfortable in her community and her identity. The festival that afternoon was joyful and well attended. Poppy moved through it with confidence, no longer anxious about crowds or noise. She helped at her garden center booth, talked with veterans about her support programs, gave advice to gardeners, and enjoyed the day with friends and family. At one point, standing near the stage with Tom beside her, holding her hand, Emma on her other side, surrounded by people who had become her chosen family, Poppy felt complete. She had been broken and had healed. She had been lost and had found herself. She had been alone and had built a community. She had been afraid and had found courage. She was Catherine, she was Poppy, and now she was simply herself, whole, integrated, and content. The sun set over the festival, casting golden light across the park, and Poppy knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey, even the painful ones, had been necessary to bring her here, to this place, these people, this life.
And that was everything. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.